Hello, viewers. Welcome to Social Justice Action Research Alliance. On this platform, we talk about issues that impact local and global social justice issues around the world. Social Justice Action Research Alliance is composed of writers, professors, activists. The alliance consists of a group of academic activists, artists, writers, poets, and professionals of various backgrounds from around the world who deeply care about protecting and promoting the rights of marginalized groups. We take an active interest in social justice and equity issues. Our goal is to engage in critical conversation that initiate actions to build global solidarity needed for social justice and make the world a more equitable, kind, and compassionate place. Today, we have with us our esteemed guest, MP Lisa Gretzky, Windsor West. She's New Democratic Party's a member of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, who was elected first in 2014 and re-elected in 2018. MPP Gretzky was elected as school trustee in 2008 for the Greater Essex County District School Board. She was elected as vice chair in 2012. So MPP Gretzky has a long engagement with the community. MPP Gretzky is the critic for community and social services. Thank you so much, Lisa, for making some time for us.
Thanks for having me on.
The first question that we always ask, before getting into the main conversation, that everybody who gets in the struggle for social justice or care for the community, they have a personal story that, reason what motivates them, reason that brings them to this justice, to these issues. They have been working with the communities, starting from school board and, coming to now you're elected, a public representative. What's your personal story that brought you to the public sphere?
Well, so just to go back a little farther in my story, I grew up in a middle-income family, working-class family. So there were times that we had a great deal of privilege and business was good and there was lots of income. And then there were other times where, because my dad worked in construction, they were struggling to piece things together. And then at the age of 17, I just wasn't able, for various reasons, to stay at home anymore. So I found myself out on the street. I was homeless at the age of 17, and then eventually managed to get an income together where I could have a roof over my head. And it was a struggle. And then fast forward in life, and my kids were in school, and there were decisions being made that I didn't feel parents were being included in. And so the route to go to get the answers was to run municipally for the school board, which I did. And luckily I was elected the first time I ran, and I was with the school board for many years. And as you pointed out, the vice chair of the board, the last year that I was there. And during my time on the school board, I started to see some of the inequities within the education system. So that was dependent on, in some cases, generational poverty. Sometimes it was related to new Canadians. We have a large population of immigrants that come in because we are a border town, and we found some inequities within the education system for them. For students with special education needs, the government was not funding the programs appropriately to be able to support those students. And that was really after a conversation with the sitting member at the time. It was a Liberal member who held this riding. I had a conversation and I just didn't really like the answers I was getting as far as the lack of investments that the government was making into the education system and to support all the students that faced some barriers and some inequities. And so it was during that meeting that I decided that if I wanted to make change, the best way to do that was to run provincially and to add my voice and the voice of my community, and have a really strong voice advocating for the needs of not just the few within the community, but everyone in the community, including those that were struggling to get by.
Wonderful. That is a very inspiring story. Wanted to know before, something that really made me curious is when you were trying to understand the needs of the immigrant communities at the school setup, what are some of the things that you felt, and even right now, is that some of the needs that you feel that is actually overlooked, is neglected, that people could actually benefit tremendously, and if those things are addressed heads on.
Well, one of the biggest issues is when we have immigrants come to Canada, when they newly land in Canada, in Ontario, or specifically in my riding in Windsor. some are struggling financially. So many of them, we have a large population of refugees that come here. They're fleeing some horrific things back home, and they come here with pretty much nothing. And they've given up everything that they own and everyone that they are familiar with to come here to seek safety and to seek a better life. So there really needs to be more programs in place, both at a municipal level, whether that's through the city council, through school boards, or at the provincial level and the federal level, to support those that are coming here to seek a better life and a safer life, frankly. But once they're here, and they're ready for their children to engage in the education system, because they really just want their kids to have some sort of normalcy, and they want them to be able to fit in with their new community, and be welcomed. And so when they register their kids for school, oftentimes what we find is there are language barriers. There are not programs in place to immediately address the fact that there are language barriers. And it's not just people coming from one country, they come from all over the world. And so we need to be looking at what kind of programs are in place and how can the province support the school boards, who often are struggling financially to provide the programs. But what does that partnership look like? And how do we ensure that we're reaching all of those families and all of those students? And it's not just the students that are facing the communication barrier, the language barrier. It's the parents too, who want to be engaged in their child's education. They want to understand what is going on, and they want to be able to step in and help teachers problem solve when there is a problem. And they certainly want to be able to help their child at home to do their homework and to learn. So we really need to make sure that there are language programs in place that are embedded right in the school system. And a shining example of that was when I was on the school board. We had identified that there was a particular school, still within the riding I represent now, where there was a large Arabic population. And so what happened is we launched a pilot program, and unfortunately, I don't like to talk about this, but it has to be talked about. There was a lot of lashback from community saying that we were catering to a specific group of people and that we weren't offering these language programs to everybody. But the reality is, there was a large Arabic population in that part of our community, and those students were going to our school, this one particular school, and they were really at a disadvantage because not only is it a lower income area, but they also didn't have the language services that they needed in order to be successful in the school system. So we launched a pilot program, which was specifically for that population of students. And what we knew was probably going to happen, but what we saw by evidence was by bringing those students into the classrooms where the teachers could speak their language. Not only did those students get to learn to read and write and math and geography, but they learned English along the way, because the teacher, first you have to reach the student in the language they understand, and then you can teach them the second language along the way. So they were not only learning the subjects they needed to learn, but they were learning the English as a second language. And it was quite successful. So we proved the naysayers in the community wrong by showing them the evidence that this program was necessary in order for those students to be able to fully participate within the education system and ultimately within the community, but also to keep the families engaged. And that is so important. So that is something that I think is lacking within the education system, is lacking from provincial leadership, is recognizing that in different communities like mine, where we have a lot of diversity and we celebrate that diversity, you can't just talk about how great it is to be a diverse community. The province really needs to step up and ensure that the school boards are funded in a way where we can offer those programs that truly acknowledge and celebrate the diversity of our community and ensure that all of those folks are fully included within the broader community.
I mean, I love this answer. It is. I can relate to this on so many levels. I've been an educator for the past 20 years. And when I came to Canada in my 30s, and I came to do my postgraduate studies, and when I taught back in Bangladesh, I taught in British school. So although I was in Bangladesh, I was teaching the language of the medium instruction was English. So I came to Canada with a bit of confidence. No, I know English. I can talk to people. But I will tell you with absolute honesty. And later I became, involved with the graduate students, student body. Particularly, I became the steward for international graduate students, because when these graduate students are coming to Canada for doing their PhDs or their research, they're not only navigating the academic life, they're also navigating the social life. They're also navigating a new cultural landscape, which is not easy at all, which is unnerving, which is so what I remember one vivid experience that, one day I beside my university, I went to buy coffee, and the woman behind the counter asked me this question: "Is that would you like some? Do you want some room in your coffee?" Now, I come from a different culture. Language is connected to the land, and I didn't understand sincerely what that meant, and I asked her, "I'm sorry, I don't understand. What do you mean that some room in my coffee, right?" But I think she mistook my relative ways, the fluidity of my language, thought that maybe I was joking, but she didn't know. But I am trained in critical sociology. I'm an educator, so I am comfortable telling about my inconveniences when I don't understand. And when I work in the Bangladeshi communities and other immigrant communities, I know that how incredibly difficult it is that we come from a different culture. We don't have the cultural capital to navigate in a completely new, society. And there, if we can have this candid, honest conversation, we can build a better solidarity. We can express our needs. A lot of the immigrant kids, they not only experience, like you have given a fantastic examples, when they, those kids are taught by people who spoke Arabic, they could relate to their realities, that what actually means. So as an educator, that warms my heart, and I could relate to it on so many levels. But this is so true. um, I'll come back to this because this is very tempting, but this is very also connected to community. My first question regarding, sorry, our dog. I'm currently, I don't know if you can understand, I'm right now in a village in Bangladesh, and our dog, family dog, is actually barking. And can you hear the azan?
Yes, yep.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of working from home.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I have a little granddaughter who is just making noise in the background because she's hungry. So
Yeah, that's
we can.
that's wonderful. I mean, that's also accepting the reality of life with grace and love and compassion, not like running into, oh, this is something. It's in a big something to be embarrassed about.
Yeah.
My question regarding the community and social services to you would be that how the current community and social services of Canada marginalizes the poor amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
So when you look at people who are low income, and we often refer to people within classes, so upper class, middle class, and lower class. That is not a way that I generally like to refer to somebody's socioeconomic or their financial. I just feel like that somewhat stigmatizes, especially when it sounds like there's a hierarchy. So if you are of higher income, you are a higher class than someone who was of lower income. So I like to place it in terms of income, lower income, middle income, higher income, as opposed to somebody's class within society. And I think that's one of the issues that we already face, is how people are labeled based on their finances. Um, but for those folks that are lower income, or those that are have a disability and rely on, here in Ontario, the Ontario Disability Support Program, or in some cases on its Ontario Works social assistance. Many of those folks have already faced other barriers throughout life, and that has gotten them to the point of where they are, whether that is that they're low wage earners, that they're in jobs that are unstable, and they don't get regular hours and the pay is not the greatest. The people that are on social assistance, Ontario Disability Support or Ontario Works, many of them have disabilities or other reasons why they cannot maybe even obtain full-time, good-paying jobs. And so the system we have now, it's supposed to be a safety net, but it really isn't. It really isn't a social safety net. One of two things happens, or sometimes both things happen. Usually both things happen, where people are living in deep, abject poverty, um, especially those on social assistance, and they get locked in a cycle of poverty through our system. The system is broken, and it's not truly supporting the people that it's meant to support, and it's not doing what it was meant to do. So it's not truly supporting the people who will have a lifelong reliance on it because they have a disability, and cannot obtain a full-time job. They just cannot physically hold down a full-time job, or in some cases any job at all. And so their income through ODSP is just over $1,100 a month. And to put that in perspective, I live in one of the most affordable areas in the province to live in, most affordable city. We're well known for having lower housing costs, but that doesn't mean our costs aren't so high that people living on social assistance can obtain a decent and stable place to live. We still have very large rates of poverty here in Windsor, specifically in my riding. 1 in 4 women and children live in poverty. We have an increase in those that use shelters and rely on food banks. They have food insecurity, so they may have a home, but their housing cost is so much that it takes all of their income, whether that's work income or whether that's through social assistance. It takes all of that income in order to just be able to find even a small apartment to live in. And so they then have to go to food banks and rely on food banks or shelters that provide meals in order to be able to eat. And so what that means is the system is not working for them. When the system is keeping them in deep, abject poverty, when it's a cycle of poverty, where there is no way, or it's darn near impossible for them to get out, that is a broken system. And it really needs to be really critically looked at and revamped. And there's lots of studies, and there's been lots of experts in the field and lots of people with lived experience who have gone forward to the previous Liberal government and now the Conservative government, and talked about studies that have been done and how to fix the system. We just don't have currently, and the past government, they just didn't have the will to fix it. And really, that system should be set up in a way where we are giving people a hand up, where we're ensuring that people that rely on it are not living in abject poverty, because the spin-offs of people living in poverty, it's not just about them not having a home. It's not just about them not being able to eat. It's about their health and well-being. It's been proven that people that do not have a stable home, that people who have food insecurity, who do not have access to the medication they need when they need it, that's an increased cost to our healthcare system. That's an increased cost to the education system, because if there are children living in poverty, they go into the education system, and our schools run breakfast programs and lunch programs in order to make sure that they have something to eat. It's a cost to our justice, an increased cost to our justice system. So we as New Democrats look at the entire picture, and we talk to the experts, and we talk to people with lived experience, myself having been one, who had been homeless and then at one time had low income. And we look at not only the human side of things, which is really the way we need to be looking at it. We need to be looking at these are not people, just numbers. These are not just finances. They're not just dollar signs. They're human beings. And they deserve a basic, decent standard of care. But if you want to look at it from purely an economic standpoint, it makes much more sense to be investing in them and into these social safety nets. And it is less of a cost to do that than it is to pay for the increased costs in our healthcare, in our education, and in our justice systems, if we don't invest in them. So during COVID-19, so you have a group of people who are already living well below poverty line, and we're already struggling. And then we get hit with a pandemic. And the advice or the directive given to everybody is stay home as much as possible. Wash your hands regularly, use hand sanitizer, wear a mask, physically distant yourself from people, order groceries delivered to your home, that kind of thing. All of those things come with an increased cost. And so for people that are already living in poverty, who already are struggling to get food and keep a house, a stable home environment, they don't have the money to be going out and buying hand sanitizer. They don't have the money to be paying to have somebody deliver the groceries. And the cost of groceries has gone up. The cost of hydro has gone up during the pandemic. The cost of just about everything has gone up. And so the government eventually, the conservative government here, eventually said that we would give a $100 top up to people on social assistance with the caveat that they had to qualify. So their caseworker had to deem them fit to get it, to show that there was a need for this $100 top up. But also that they had to ask for it. It wasn't an automatic top up. And that it was only for a short window of time. It's now expired. They don't have this top up anymore. And yet here we are still in a pandemic, and here we are with the cost of everything still more. And so rather than recognizing that we have people who are already starting from a position of struggle and facing barriers and poverty, what the government has done is put them at even greater risk of food insecurity and housing insecurity. And we are finding shelters that were already struggling to keep up are now overflowing with people who are losing their homes because they don't have the income. They can't afford all the extra expenses. We find that food banks are seeing a huge increase in people accessing their services. And we're finding that as a result of that, there's an increased cost to our healthcare system. We're finding mental health and addictions struggles are increasing as people are finding it harder and harder to cope with the reality of what's going on. And we're finding that people who are on social assistance and other low-income people are becoming more and more isolated, more so than people who are middle income or higher income. So the pandemic has really adversely and disproportionately impacted low-income individuals and families, and those that are relying on our social safety net, on our social assistance. And if you dig even deeper into that, you will find that even more so, it has disproportionately affected racialized individuals within our communities. I mean, there's so much. If the government really wanted to support everybody through the pandemic, the research is there to show who is struggling the most and who needs the most help. Certainly the approach should not be just a $100 top up. We had said that the top up needed to be $300 a month at minimum, that it needed to be automatic, recognizing that many people who are on social assistance or low income don't have access to internet, may not have cable, may not have traditional means of communicating, and so may not be aware that benefit was even available to them. But it should have been a standard top up across the board for everybody that's on social assistance. They shouldn't have had to ask for it. And it should still be continuing because we are still in a pandemic and the costs of everything have still gone up. And we are all still being told to isolate and to order groceries instead of going to the store if we can, and that kind of thing. The increased costs are there. And I just want to, I know I'm going on a long time here, but it's such a complex thing, and there's so much to it, so many different factors. Just to talk about my community specifically, our mayor here decided on his own, against public health advice, that the best response would be to cancel buses, to cancel public transportation here. That is something that people who are on social assistance and people that are low income rely on, our public transportation, our buses. And our mayor decided arbitrarily that we needed to shut the buses down for the safety of the community. and then told people that they could people with disabilities who rely on using our public transit, to just have their friend or neighbor take them to the grocery store or to medical appointments. While public health is telling people that we should be staying apart, the mayor is saying you should just knock on your neighbor's door and have them take you, or to take a cab, which is not at all affordable for somebody who is on social assistance or someone who's low income. So it's not just at the provincial level. It can also be at the municipal level, where there's a disconnect between the politicians and the policymakers and the reality of the people on the ground that are trying to simply get by through this pandemic, and do so while maintaining a safe, reliable home and being able to eat.
It's
It's
oh my god, this is
oh my god, it has got so many dimensions, and if I look at it, in terms of social assistance and community services, one of the things that there are a lot of studies done in terms of also uh, in the immigrant communities. So when we think about Canada, particularly from outside Canada, our understanding of Canada is not always complete. We think we don't understand the poverty, we don't understand the inequality that exists in Canada. That is very much a reality. But then, the public discourses, the public, narrative is that, it's a land where, you get all these opportunities, everything. Particularly, I think, people need to be informed what is the reality so that they can take an informed decision. You mentioned something about the mayor. And if I talk about Toronto, we have a mayor who goes on public record saying is that there is no such thing called white privilege. We have a premier who says that in Ontario there's no place of racism in Ontario. I really wanted to dig deep into it. Is that in terms of where the data came out that in Toronto, more than 83% people who tested positive are people who are Black people and people of color, and that's just the pure cold fact numbers. And we somehow, a lot of the times, I'm sure that you're familiar with it, is that we try to understand the racial justice and the inequality that exists in Canada, comparing us with our neighbor in the south. Well, this horrible things happen in the United States, but we are a land where those things don't happen. You have been involved in the community service for a long time. If you were to speak like the details of it, what are the things that you have seen when you look at how this pandemic has impacted, taking into consideration the gender aspect of it, the race aspect of it, the ability aspect of it, in your riding and around Ontario and in Toronto.
So it's the mayor of Toronto that you're referring to, who says that there's no such thing as white privilege. The mayor of Toronto was white.
Of course.
So, and I think that's a pretty fine example of white privilege, is when you're a white older male who can stand there and say that there's no such thing as white privilege. That's a shining example of white privilege. When you have racialized individuals within your own community who, it has been proven, experience more interactions with the police that often end up in aggressive interactions. In some cases where people have died because of the actions of the police, because of that interaction. I think that's a shining example of white privilege, when you can stand there and say that there is no such thing as white privilege, and deny the evidence that's put before you. And coming from a diverse community where we have, as I pointed out, we have we have a high immigrant population. We're lucky that many stay here. However, many do relocate. We are the starting point when they come to Canada, and they often move on to other cities like London or Toronto. And that's something that we talk about celebrating and how great it is that we are diverse, but it is one thing to say that we celebrate that and that we are proud of that. Is another thing to actually do the hard work to ensure that those individuals are actually being supported. And I don't think that there is, I'm going to be bold in saying this, and someone may prove me wrong, and I hope they do. I don't think that there is probably any city within this province or within this country where there has not been at least one individual who has faced discrimination, racism, xenophobia. And again, I hope I'm wrong. Hopefully somebody will be able to prove me wrong, that there is at least one city within our country where there hasn't been a case of that. But I think if you look at the evidence that's out there, Public Health Ontario on their website has documentation that they put out talking about specifically to COVID-19, how disproportionately our racialized communities are affected by COVID-19 as opposed to white people. They've talked about, and then they break it down by the number of Black people who have been affected by COVID-19, the number of Latino people. They talk about all the other social determinants. So for some races, there are health conditions that are more prominent within that particular race as opposed to another. They talk about generational poverty and what that looks like, and who within our community are most often affected by intergenerational poverty, and how that's affected them specifically during COVID-19. And they've talked about the rates of men compared to women who have been affected by COVID-19, have tested positive for COVID-19. There are studies out there that talk about how when you dig down even deeper into it, the number of women, the percentage of women compared to men who are affected by it, but not just for contracting COVID-19, but all the socioeconomic things as well. When you get into breaking it down to not just women, but women of color, Black women, Indigenous women, and what we find, and I don't know how anybody could discredit all of this information. It's not just public health. There's been lots of studies done. I don't know how anybody could say that there isn't white privilege, or that there isn't racism, or that all the other barriers that racialized communities face, racialized people face, aren't contributing to the fact that that those people see a higher rate of risk or infection when it comes to COVID-19, and also deaths when it comes to COVID-19. So I think what really needs to happen at the very base of it all is that those of us that have privilege, I'm certainly one of them because of my skin color. It doesn't mean that I haven't faced discrimination as a woman. Absolutely, I have faced discrimination. Having been someone who lived on the streets for a while, absolutely, I faced discrimination. People had certain views about homeless people and why they're homeless. So I think what we need politicians who recognize their own privilege. I'm certainly from an income level now that provides me privileges that others don't have. And we need to do that. And that can be really painful for some people. It can be really uncomfortable for some people. And it should be. It should make you uncomfortable enough that you want to do something to make it better. It should make you comfortable enough to recognize that that my constituents who are racialized are not struggling, or are not faring through this pandemic the way that I am, or some of my neighbors are. And that should make me so uncomfortable, and it does for me personally, but for all politicians, it should make them so uncomfortable that they want to change that and they want to make it better. I personally want to be in a place where we can honestly and genuinely say that there is not racism, that we do not have discrimination against gender, that we do not have xenophobia. I would love to be in a place where I could say that honestly and not just say that to make people like me, that look like me, that have the same skin color as me, that we're not just saying it to make ourselves feel comfortable, that we actually really mean it. And that is and that the lived experience of women, when, people of color and women of color, racialized communities, that they honestly are living what it is, where they're living the narrative we're trying to put out there, that everything is fine and everybody's doing okay and there's no such thing as racism or discrimination. And hopefully someday we'll get there. But the best path forward is for those that are experiencing it to call it out when it happens. For those of us that witness it when it's happening, to call it out. And for those of us that are in leadership positions, whether that's at a municipal level, a provincial or federal level, to call it out and to bring forward policies that will address the inequities that we are seeing, in order to be able to eliminate those inequities, and not to do that in a silo, not to do it so that we have a group of older white men making decisions for women or racialized women, that we don't have a group of white people, period, whether that's women or men or a mix of all the above and all ages, that it's not just white people at the table that are talking about what's best for racialized people, because we don't know what's best for racialized people. Racialized people know what's best for them. They know the barriers that they face. And so we have to be willing to bring them to the table and earnestly listen to them. And we need to be able to do, to deal with how uncomfortable that is going to be for us, because that slight time frame of us being uncomfortable with addressing maybe some of the ugliness and the stuff in ourselves, is nothing compared to the daily, monthly, yearly barriers and uncomfortable situations that people of color and our racialized community members are facing. And that was a really long answer, and I apologize, but that is a really, and I'm glad you asked that, because that's a really important conversation to be having on an ongoing basis. And there's just so much behind the scenes when it comes to that particular topic.
One of the things that we're doing with this conversation, that we're trying to promote critical literacy. So this conversation, having done in the a virtual platform, what happens? This conversation stays there, and then subsequently, it actually generates a richer conversation between people from different backgrounds. And particularly, I'm coming from a background of being an educator and community organizer. This this conversation, honest conversations, are actually incredibly important. One of the things that I find incredibly important to recognize about privilege is that when we have them, we don't recognize them. But when we don't have it, we feel it, every single day, every single day. There was a study done in 2018. I'm talking about 2018, just 2 years ago, by University of Toronto and Ryerson University. And they sent out resume. And this study also is done in the USA. And identical resumes, the only thing they changed is the name. Let's say Samir versus Anderson. That's it. Mm-hmm. And identical resumes. In Canada, in 2018, it's a public funded study that 38% people did not get a call back. Now, just if you let that sink for a bit, is that 38% don't even get a call back. Now, think about, the subsequent hiring process. Is that, okay, I go on the interview, and what happens? But these are uncomfortable conversations. These are very uncomfortable conversations that we don't want to have. But just because we don't have this conversation, it doesn't put us in a good place. In 1962, a sociologist from York University has written a book, it's called Vertical Mosaic. We pride about Canada's society to be a multicultural society. We say it's a mosaic society, but the mosaic is vertical, and on top, the color is white. and you have all the other colors beneath it. And as a graduate student and graduate research assistant, and when I also worked at the university, one of the things I would ask my students at the university, particularly my white students, I would ask them is that just think about all the privileges that you enjoy just because the color of your skin, just because the last name that you have. You have got nothing to do with any human quality that is attached to the color of your skin or the last name that you have. But you actually navigate through the social, economic, and political world with so much safety, so much safety. I mean, there are so many people now we have a new face, which I particularly, whenever I am engaging in conversation with policymakers, provincial leaders, I'm trying to draw one particular attention is that digital racism. We need to talk about digital racism. Is that now people's resume go through algorithm, computer program, and when the computer program looks at the past data and they find out, oh, the successful candidates where the names are these are the attributes, these are the postal codes. In the past, people did this sort of racism in person with their biases and able to hide it in plain face, like, no, and I'm not racist. But you see, there's a fantastic book. It's called The Racism Without a Racist. If I want to have that uncomfortable conversation, or a person of color, or a person of a woman of color, with a white person, immediately we go on a defensive, as if I am, attacking that white person personally. It's something to do with their morality. It's something to do with their own, credibility. No, it's a system. It's a structure that needs to be talked about boldly and honestly. Question to you, a very honest question to you, is that in the school system, I have particularly seen is that how a lot of the immigrant people, particularly the refugee population in Canada, we to navigate the school system, first of all, it's a different country, different culture, different trend altogether. On top of that, navigate through the school system to actually talk about the experiences of the children. That is really, really hard. You have talked to thousands of people in your life, being in the public domain. When you talk to white people about racism, what is effective to call them in? We want to have a conversation without shutting them down, because there's no point if I just pontificate and get into but our pain is real, our suffering is real, and that is backed by data, evidence, research. What triggers white people so much? Why can't we have a conversation, meaningful conversation? And yes, if it is uncomfortable, let it be uncomfortable. What is so bad about it?
I think that's, I can't speak for all white people, but I can tell you what my feeling is, my experience is I think that we as human beings want to believe that we are good human beings, and that we don't want to. It's really difficult to recognize, especially if you don't know you're doing it. And so you'll hear my favorite is always, I'm not racist, but usually if it's followed by a but, you're about to say something that's probably racist. But it's I think that for some people, they don't even realize that some of the things that they're saying or they're doing are harmful to somebody else and are hurtful, because it is so ingrained systemically that we think that's the norm. We don't know that there's something wrong. We don't know that it's hurtful to somebody. We don't know the damage that it can do. And my dad was an immigrant. He came from Yugoslavia during the Second World War. He was 16 years old. And when he came over, he worked on a farm. So, we have here in our area, we have the migrant workers that come every season to ensure that the crops are getting picked so that those of us in the area get to eat, and not realizing that many of those migrant workers have terrible living conditions, and they're not being, which I just had this conversation with someone the other day who said, I had no idea we thought we were feeding them well, the ones that are having to isolate because of COVID-19, because we had an outbreak within the migrant workers. It took far too long to get it under control. Um, um, but they said they didn't realize they were feeding them these meals with chicken and some vegetables and rice. But the thing is the chicken wasn't cooked the way that these migrant workers would normally eat it. So to them, it was almost raw, and they were afraid to eat it. So it took a while with some advocates talking about it to make the decision makers understand that, yes, it's great that you're giving them food, but this is not culturally appropriate for them. They don't, to them, this is almost raw. Just as if I was to go to their home in their country, there would likely be things that I wouldn't eat because I was raised to think that you don't eat those things or it's not cooked the right way. And so I think that when you look at that particular instance, when you look at the fact that when my dad came and he worked on a farm, so basically he was a migrant worker, and the conditions that he faced and the racism that he faced, and he was white. He was a white immigrant, but the discrimination that he faced just for being from another country, and that somehow that made him less worthy. And the system at the time was set up where this had gone on for generations, and people just thought this was the norm and it was okay. Slavery. This went on for so long, and people thought that this was okay until someone didn't think it was okay, until someone finally listened to the people that were enslaved and said, this is inhumane. And so I think when somebody is pointing out, especially if it's generally speaking, so if it's perceived like you're talking about all of us are equal, all of us are equally racist, all of us are equally discriminatory, xenophobic, that gets people's backs up. But I think it's just that innate human nature to not want to address the ugly stuff, and to really recognize that although we don't think what we're doing is racist because it's been there systemically for generations, that it is racist, and that hurts, that stings to think that, oh my gosh, I'm one of them, I'm a racist. But I don't think that should stop people from calling it out, because the more that it's called out, especially those that aren't experiencing racism. So if you're not Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, if you're not an immigrant, if you come from a place of privilege, that place of privilege that mayor in Toronto Mayor Tory doesn't want to recognize, if you're not within those categories, it's, I think, even more important for us to recognize when we have exhibit certain behaviors that we may not think are racist or discriminatory, but that we get called out on it and that we have to face it. And then we take that and we use that to stand with our racialized community members to call out racism when we see it. Because it isn't until those of us that have that white privilege, or have that financial privilege, or work in a job like I do that has that privilege, it isn't until we all start calling it out and continue to call it out, it isn't until we're doing that consistently that I think we're going to see a real shift in the way people think and the way they talk and the way they interact with racialized members of our community. I think that's a really important piece. And I will tell you, I have a very good friend from within the LGBTQ community, and I have said things, and I've always said to her, you need to let me know if I say something that's hurtful, because this is what I know, and I think I'm being a really supportive ally. But if I'm using language that is not appropriate or is not supportive, you need to tell me, because I can't be a good ally if I don't know my own bad behaviors, if you don't call that out. And so I think that we can't put all of the onus on racialized people to be the champions of eliminating racism. I don't think that's fair. They're the ones that are facing it. They're the ones that have the barriers, and they're the ones that are experiencing the trauma, because that racism is directed at them. So I don't think it's fair to put all of the burden on racialized people to lead the charge to eliminate racism. But I think it's really important that when you have someone, especially if you know they're an ally, um, when they're using language or they're doing something or they're referring to a system, because there are systems set up all through this province and all through this country um, that are discriminatory. And so it's really important when people are experiencing that to ensure, especially with allies, that they point out why that's discriminatory and try and spark those allies to learn why it's to do their homework, to do research, and to change the way they speak and the way they interact, and then for them to lead the charge. Because they're not coming from that place of discrimination. They're not coming from that place of trauma. And I think, again, we come from a place of privilege, and we should be using that privilege to make things better. I think that's a responsibility that we have. But I think when you really dig down to it, it's just very difficult for people to recognize they've when they've done something that's hurtful to someone else, when they don't realize that's what it is. And that I just want to. I'll wrap it up after this, but I just want to use one instance that, and it's not one I'm super proud of by any means. I was telling a story to Jagmeet Singh, who used to be my provincial colleague, but is now the leader of the NDP federally. And Jagmeet is a turban wearing Sikh, and we were having a conversation one day while he was still an MPP, and I was telling this story about a family member who actually has, most people would think that he has a great deal of money. He is doing okay financially. However, his mental capacity is starting to slip. He has dementia. And so he doesn't go out with money because he would give it all away. And he was out and bumped into a colleague of mine and asked my colleague if he could borrow a toonie. And my colleague thought, well, that's really weird coming from this particular person, because I know that person has money. So why do they need to borrow money? But he gave it to him. And this particular family member walked back down the street a little bit. And this was in Toronto. And there was a homeless man sitting there. And he gave the toonie to the homeless man. So he borrowed money from a friend of mine to give it to a homeless man. And this was a man who had a lot of money, but anyway, so I'm relaying this story to Jagmeet, and I said, so he bummed a toonie off of this friend of mine, and as soon as I said bummed the toonie off, I stopped, and I said to him, wow, here I am talking about someone who's experiencing homelessness, and I used the term bummed money, and that term is inherently discriminatory. It is a term that is used to demean someone who is experiencing homelessness. And here I am talking about this feel-good story about somebody supporting someone who's homeless, and I've just used a term that is used negatively when it comes to homelessness. And so I caught it, luckily, and said, wow, I just did that. And Jagmeet looked at me, someone who has experienced racism and discrimination his entire life, and he said to me, it absolutely was. What you said was awful, like it was wrong, but you caught it. You caught your behavior, you recognized it, and now you know not to do it again. That's the important thing. And I appreciated that that's the way he addressed it. And so I think that, again, it was not a moment I was super proud of, but I think it's really important. And as someone who's experiencing racism or discrimination, it is not your job to make those of us that aren't racialized, that aren't facing racism, it is not your job to make us feel better about the fact that you are facing racism. It's our job to eliminate racism so that you don't have to face it anymore. And I think that's an important discussion for allies to be having as well, and those within the racialized communities. Is it is not I don't, the word, I'm going to use the word victim, but you are the victims of racism. It's not up to the victim to make the perpetrator feel better. It's up to the perpetrator to recognize that behavior and to not do it again, to fix it. Um, so I think that's an important piece too. And they're difficult conversations to have, and some people are more open to it than others. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't, just because it makes someone uncomfortable, doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. A friend of mine, a very, very dear friend of mine, I love him dearly, from Canada, and my mentor. In many ways, I've learned so much from him. Ted Meridian, he talks about something is that there are different kinds of competence. So sometimes we do things not knowing. He calls it, unconscious incompetence, and then some people do it knowing. That's conscious incompetence. Like they. So this is something that always we have to we have to understand the difference, and and this is true that attacking somebody, you attack, and and if you educate them, that change enable. Having said that, I will also I will also say there are people. There is such a thing called willful ignorance. Not knowing something is not a problem, but not wanting to know is a problem. I often say it this way, is that the conviction of knowing is a dangerous ignorance. Like I stand somewhere and I think I know, and my confidence of knowing something is at the level of conviction. Like I have not experienced what it means to be a woman, and how I haven't experienced those marginalization. But if I can say with that kind of conviction that no, my sister is a woman, my wife is a woman, my mother is a woman, I know what their experiences are like. Now that is a conviction that is dangerous. I read a paper that really moved me and humbled me, about homelessness, and the research was done in Toronto. Is one of the things that homeless people experience is that people walk by. I may not have a Looney Toonie or a $5 to hand to a homeless person, but we actually avoid eye contact with them. And what happens that we are invisibilizing people, and that level of ignorance is that not having, because, and again, this is the capitalist curse, is that not having money or being poor is considered to be something inherently deficient in a person, as if that person cannot be a victim of system or structural inequality, right? And there is one other thing that I've learned is that when a homeless person is, after a long time, if somebody calls them by their name, they feel startled because they go so many days without actually somebody calling them by their name. Now, when I read that paper, I was thinking, oh my God, I have never ever thought from that perspective. One of my favorite questions, and that is connected to your personal journey. You understood that when you were engaged, when you started working with the school board, that to make changes you needed to take part in politics, as in policymaker. People who are marginalized, people coming from marginalized communities, if they don't participate in politics, bringing changes are going to be hard, like really hard. And I'm proud on so many levels that particularly NDP is doing so much to bringing people from marginalized background into politics and in political participation to make changes in policy. I often give this example that I'm from Bangladesh. Bengali Muslims came to North America as early as 1880 on the British ship. At that time, they were criminalized by both British Empire and American Empire. At that time, these Bengali Muslim men, their life was possible because Black and indigenous women and Puerto Rican women supported these men, even to consider a possibility of life. What do you think we should do, or NDP is doing? And I'm going to ask you, in particularly from your experiences, that what could be done so that somebody from let's say, Syrian refugee community becomes interested in understanding, no, I need to take part in politics, to bring changes. Or somebody from, Bangladesh or Myanmar, going to Canada, like saying, like, for example, as I was giving the time that 1880, we have our first ever Bangladeshi-born, Bangladeshi of Bangladeshi descent, Dolly Begum in the parliament. We're extremely happy. But it took a long time, like really a long time, to have somebody in the parliament. What NDP is doing a lot of good jobs. What else needs to be done or could be done better to bring more political participations, from the marginalized communities?
Well, I think it's part of it is making them feel like their voice matters, or that they have a voice. So, as I pointed out in my community, we have a lot of refugees and a lot of immigrants. And so when I go out, and I'm lucky that my federal counterpart, the MP for the area, is also a New Democrat. Turns out he's also my neighbor. That's not far from me. So we go out canvassing together a lot, and I find that people really appreciate that. That him and I will go out outside of an election and knock on doors. He'll take one side of the street and I'll take the other, and people are surprised when we're at their door for no reason, just to check in and see how they're doing. And we're able to say, I'm able to say that's a federal issue, but I have the MPP or the MP across the street. I'll go get him for you, and he can send me if somebody has a provincial question. But what I find is really important with that is that outside of an election, we have an opportunity to go to people's doors and get to know some of the people that are new to our community, that have come from other countries, that are new to our community, who don't really understand the systems that are set up. So they don't know how to navigate the education system. If they need some sort of interaction with the justice system, whatever that is, whatever that looks like, even if, say, they were in a minor collision and they might be afraid to call the police, or they don't know who to call or what to do. They don't know how to get, if they need social assistance, they don't know how to navigate that system. They don't really understand our healthcare system. So by us going out and going to their doors, it starts that dialogue. First of all, they're usually really shocked that their member of provincial parliament or their member of parliament is standing at their door, because for many of these newcomers, that is not the way politics works in their country. They often don't have access to politicians in that way, and so it usually surprises them. But then it starts that dialogue where they get to see that there weren't human beings too, and that their voice does matter. We want to hear from them. And then it also gives us the opportunity of getting into the conversation. This is during a campaign, but also outside it happens, where they'll say, well, I'm not a citizen, so I can't vote. So you're wasting your time talking to me. Because that's how they feel. They feel like because they can't vote, or because they can't run for office and be elected themselves at that particular point in time, then that means that their voice doesn't matter. And that gives us the opportunity to say to them, well, you may not be able to vote, but I'm still your MPP. It's still my job to represent you. You may not be a citizen yet. You may not have permanent resident status, but you're still here in our community. You still live in my riding, and it's still my job to represent you and help you. It doesn't depend on your ability to vote. And so that helps to open up the conversations as well. And I think that helps, it helps make them feel more comfortable to raise issues when they have them, or to ask questions about the system set up here. And it makes them more comfortable in contacting my office and saying, this is one of the systemic barriers I'm facing right now, trying to navigate this system. And this is why I believe I'm facing this barrier. And sometimes it's because they are a racialized member of the community. that they're looked at as a certain way. I don't think it's any secret. I think it happens across the province and across the country, where you see discrimination against our Muslim brothers and sisters. And if you look at what goes on in my community specifically, the amount of good that our Muslim community does for those in need in our broader community, you would think that people would be more open and more understanding and less discriminatory, and they're not. I mean, we're pretty good here in Windsor, but we still have discrimination, especially when it comes to our Muslim brothers and sisters. And so it's getting out and having those conversations and getting them more engaged, so we truly understand what is going on in their lives, truly understand the barriers they're facing, and then encouraging them to get more involved. So we have riding associations. Every political party and every riding has riding associations. So it's telling them to come and get involved in a riding association. And that doesn't have to be a great deal of time that they have to put in, but it gives them an opportunity to have a say directly within that political party and that riding association, and directly to whoever the candidate or the actual sitting member is. And then if they do get their citizenship, it gives us an opportunity to teach them what it's like to be the elected official, what it's like to be the sitting member, and to help kind of guide them through any of the concerns that they may have about running for office. And it's not easy for anybody to run for office. It's not easy to put yourself out there and face the criticism. And some of it is fair. Most of it is not. It can be very personal. When you add the fact that you're a woman, it gets even worse. If you're a racialized woman, it's even more difficult, or any person from the racialized community. And so it's important that we get these folks involved, bring them in to get to know us, get them involved in the riding associations. And then if they're starting to show interest in actually running for office, or possibly working for somebody who's elected, that's another option as well, to get involved and to help push for change, because we don't do it. The elected officials don't do it all on our own. We have staff, we have teams that help us do it. So they help to form policy and things like that. But it's through having those really kind of basic, down to earth human interactions that I think that we can help those from within the racialized communities feel more comfortable raising their voice, feel more comfortable getting involved politically, and gives us an opportunity to do what we can to help them break through the barriers and the concerns that they have about running for public office, and then hopefully get them to the place where we have Dolly. And it's phenomenal to have Dolly, and she brings a perspective that I certainly don't have, and it's an important voice at the table. To have Dolly. We have the first ever Black caucus. The NDP has a Black caucus, and there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes with them. And you know what? Sometimes they even challenge the members within their own caucus, and talk about language and things like that. And that's, again, uncomfortable, but important. It has to happen. And so I think it's really getting to people. It's us going to them. It's not expecting that they're going to come to us. There are many people, as I said, who come from countries and regions where politicians are inaccessible. And in some cases, that is something that's perpetrated by the politicians. Like, we are better than everybody else. We are of a higher standard, and we don't, we're not going to interact with you. And we want you to be quiet and just let us do our thing. But people have to remember, even if they are new to Canada and are not citizens yet and cannot vote, the politicians and the decision makers are no better than the people that they represent. We are not in any way, shape, or form better. We have someone always says, I have people who say to me, you're really special, and I say, no, I'm not special. The opportunity I've been given, and and the privilege I've been given by the people who elected me, because it is a privilege. That the job is special. The opportunity I've been given is special. That doesn't make me special. What I do with that opportunity maybe is what defines me as a person. But I don't inherently become special just because of the position I have. And it's really important that we get out to the racialized communities, to the folks that are living in poverty, and anyone who is facing these systemic barriers, because it's throughout the entire legislative system. There are barriers. There are discriminatory and racist policies and procedures, long-standing traditions within the legislature and also in the House of Commons federally. But it's important that we bring people in to see that we are just normal people, and we are accountable to the people that not only elect us, the people that vote for us, but for the people that can't, and the people that don't. And we represent everyone. And again, it doesn't make you, your behavior and what you do with the opportunity you're given as an elected official is what defines you as a person, not the position itself. And I think there's often a disconnect, and that's why so many people don't get engaged in politics. They become very cynical because they don't feel like the people who are elected to represent them are actually representing them and their interest.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned about Black Caucus. I think it is so incredibly impressive that right now we have a Black Caucus in Ontario and 3 Black women. They all have I'm sorry, I'm perhaps I'm from academia, that's why. They all have their PhDs, 3 women. I mean, incredibly. I mean, where in the world? I mean, at least in Ontario's history. And when I hear people like Dr. Rima Burns, Dr. Jill Andrew, or Dr. Laura May Lindo, it's like you listen and you understand that, oh my God, there are so many things that we don't know. And if you have politicians like that who actually informed decision making, that brings in changes that actually we need. And I'm very, very hopeful. That there's no doubt about it. Lisa, thank you very much for making some time for us. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, this is just the beginning of conversation that we need to have incredibly critical, courageous, and conversation that can be uncomfortable. Because if you don't talk things that are uncomfortable, we will not be able to understand what impacts us, what can actually improve our life. As somebody said, is that the conversation begins at disagreement. If I live in an echo chamber, I don't really learn anything, right? So you have given us time from your busy schedule, and we will again reach out to you in future. Thank you very much for giving us some time.
Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, and dear audience, thank you very much for being with us. And in Canada, have a wonderful day, and in Bangladesh, have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.